Okay, floor's yours, Mike.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shelby. Appreciate the intro and thank you everyone for being here tonight. My name is Mike. I am 6 months off of Kratom and wanted to share my story with everyone here today so that, provide some hope and, just kind of tell you how it was. Yeah, I sort of like was thinking about things. I made some notes. I'm going to try to kind of go through here and talk a bit. Trigger warning, I will be talking about other substances, trauma, death, blah blah blah. Probably all of those things. So I'll try to not go into too much detail, but just so you know, that is a part of my story. So going back, when I first got into recovery, I had a really hard time accepting that I was an addict because I sort of had the preconceived notion of what an addict is. The junkie that's on the side of the road and homeless and blah blah blah. And for me, my addiction, while it took me to some very deep dark places, I kind of always was able to maintain like a job, and I stayed out of jail and those types of things. So I really lied to myself for a long time. And the reason I bring that up is because when I first got into recovery, they talked about a lot about, childhood traumas and things like that. And I was always like, well, I had a great childhood. I had very supportive, loving parents. I didn't have anything that I thought should be, traumatic. But when I started to kind of dig into my story, I realized that I did have some really major things that happened in my childhood and adolescence that really did affect me, and my ability to cope with pain and fear and anxiety and a lot of those things. So I bring that up because when I was little, my younger brother was born with a really severe birth defect. He wasn't able to walk. They thought he would never be able to walk, but he overcame and had a bunch of surgeries. And so I say that because my childhood wasn't as normal as I kind of had in my head. I spent a lot of time in the hospitals when I was young. Just a lot of time really worrying about my younger brother. He had, I think, a dozen surgeries by the time he was 3 or 4 to correct his legs and try to help him walk. And so I didn't really develop a lot of close friendships when I was younger. I sort of isolated a lot and kind of was on my own, and just sort of developed a very early sort of, um, I don't know if distrust maybe of, or just, I thought the world was kind of dark from a young age of like, why would this happen to my younger brother? He's so sweet, so innocent, and he's having to go through all of this stuff. And so I was a very protective older brother. I did, I started to kind of get into trouble. I maintained, pretty good grades, and I was social in school. I played sports and I did all of those kind of things, but I sort of started to act out, kind of at a young age. I started, smoking weed, skateboarding. I was really into punk rock music and just kind of had an anti-establishment mentality from a very young age of distrust of authority figures. I really idolized rock stars, Kurt Cobain and Jimi Hendrix, and kind of the 27 club of all of these rock stars that died when they were 27. And I sort of visioned that lifestyle for myself. That to me was really cool. It was glamorized, and I guess I didn't really place a lot of value on living long and living a long full life and growing old. I kind of wanted to live hard and party and die young at a very young age. And looking back at it, it was kind of strange that I sort of developed that mentality so young. But I still I worked hard in school. I worked hard. I started a lawn mowing business when I was young, which I eventually turned into just selling weed to people that I was mowing lawns for. Um, so I kind of got addicted to like that lifestyle. I remember one of the things that happened when I was really young. I was actually only probably about 10 years old when I stole a fanny pack from a friend of mine. He was kind of this kid in the neighborhood that um I basically like stole his wallet and all of his money and stuff. And I never got caught for it, but I remember that feeling of like when people were asking, oh, did you see anything? If you heard, and I was like, oh no, and I was lying. And I remember that feeling of guilt and shame that I had done it, but then also like sort of this weird rush that I had gotten away with it, and kind of like, ooh, I'm this edgy criminal, because I stole a kid's tummy pouch with like $2 in it. But so sort of that was something that that lifestyle and sort of the glamorization of being a gangster or being an outlaw and all of those kind of things just always really appealed to me. And I was such a faker because I'm in like AP honors chemistry, and I'm like, ooh, I'm such a bad boy, I'm so edgy. Um so anyways, I was pretty shy around girls when I was young, and I got my first girlfriend when I was 13, and sort of was pressured into having sex at a very young age. I lost my virginity to her when I was 13, and got drunk, and it was just like, looking back, it's just all very like kind of surreal to me that I had grown up that quickly, or I thought that I was growing up that quickly and making these very adult decisions. And so alcohol, and weed were pretty common when I was in my teenage years, and I started to sort of got addicted to like relationships and to women and to just like thinking that I was cool, you know what I mean? Just trying to like impress other people. And I was really just trying to, you know, find myself. I felt so inadequate all the time. I never felt comfortable in my skin. I always felt like an outsider. I grew up, because of my brother's condition. There's a lot of medical bills. We were pretty, I mean, we weren't poor, but we were pretty, money was always an issue. Both of my parents had to work full-time jobs. My mom, sometimes she was a caretaker and would work 24, 36 hours at a time. So I was kind of raising myself and my little brother. And so yeah, I was acting out, getting into trouble again. And I got arrested when I was 16 for possession, and that kind of messed up a lot of opportunities I had. I was scheduled to go start running START program, which was basically where you could take college courses in high school, to kind of start earning your college degree. And that kind of all went by the wayside because of my arrest, and I had to go through like a diversions program. And so again, it kind of started stacking on like the things of like my self-image is now like even more so like I'm an outlaw, I'm a troublemaker, I'm blah blah blah. And so when I was 17, another big trauma. This was kind of like the big thing that happened in high school. Three of my closest friends died in a car accident when I was 17. Drunk driver. The driver had been drinking. They went around a corner and flipped the car, killed all of them pretty much instantly. And that was like a big turning point for my isolation, really. And just sort of like, I remember when I got the news, like my reaction was to sleep, and like I slept for days on end. When I wasn't sleeping, I was smoking pot. um, and so I remember that being like very pivotal as far as just kind of um, how I dealt with adversity. Um, so then let's see. So fast forward a little bit. I moved to LA when I was 20. I went to music school at the Musicians Institute down there. And that was kind of when I got my like advanced degree in partying. It went from, pot and alcohol to, harder drugs, cocaine, pills, things like that. I started eating really poorly. I gained a bunch of weight, had a really negative self image of myself. I started losing my hair too when I was like 19. So I was gaining weight, I was losing my hair, I was doing drugs. Like I was just not healthy, and my self image was horrible at that time. So it just kind of perpetuated that like need to numb myself from these feelings of inadequacy and of, just feeling like I wasn't good enough. I got a really good job out of school in LA. I got to work as an audio engineer for a couple of clubs in Long Beach, one in Malibu and one in Santa Barbara. I would go back and forth between the clubs doing sound every weekend. I got to do sound for tons of different artists. I got to do sound for Snoop, for Kanye, for Cypress Hill, Jerry Lewis, The Killers, like just all these different crazy artists that I had really looked up to. And I'm like 20, 21, 22 at this point in time. And I was like, really just like, that was a point in time where I felt like, okay, I've achieved something really cool. Like when I would come home and tell my friends the stories, they're just like, whoa, that's so cool. And people would come down and visit me, and we'd go to the shows, and I'd be like, yeah, let's go backstage and hang out with Snoop. Um, so anyways, like that kind of like inflated my ego a bit of like, okay, I'm big shit. I live in LA, blah, blah, blah. But all the time, like I'm drinking on the job, I'm partying on the job. Instead of doing my job, I'm like trying to find the bouncer and see if he has any drugs, like things like that. And so that all kind of came to a head when I really kind of had like a wake up call. I went out to a club with some friends and got blacked out and woke up the next morning in an alley in some strange neighborhood. And I don't know how I got there, what happened. My phone's gone. And so that was like, okay, I need to figure my life out here. Like this isn't sustainable. So I decided at that point that I should move back home. I live up in Washington State. So I moved from LA back to Washington and just kind of felt very defeated. I'd moved down there to be a rock star music producer, and I'd gotten these great opportunities. I hung out with all these artists, and I had people interested in my music and this and that, and it just never quite panned out. And so when I moved home, that's when I started really getting into, that was kind of around the time that the Oxycontin phase of when the epidemic, the opioids and stuff, that's when things really started to take a turn where it was like, okay, I'm not just like partying, like this is like maintaining my lifestyle. Like I can't get through the day without pills. So that was definitely a turning point in my addiction recovery. At that point, I met my ex, who actually was the girl that I dated back in middle school that I had lost my virginity to. And that was a whole toxic relationship. We reconnected, we bought a house together. We had like this, normal life together for 10 years. But like the whole time, I couldn't stop drinking, using, and I ended up getting diagnosed with gout at one point, kind of during that. It was about halfway through our relationship, and my doctor was basically like, you need to cut out the alcohol. And I was like, okay, yeah, it's not gonna happen. Just give me a pill or something. He's like, no, like seriously, like if you don't stop drinking, you're gonna, keep having these flare-ups. So that was sort of when I realized that I had a drinking problem beyond just like I liked to party, because I would have gout flare-ups and I would try to cure the gout flare-up by like chugging tequila, to think that it would somehow numb the pain. And he also prescribed me opiates, so like that kind of helped fuel that whole thing, even though I was already buying them off the street. Now I had like a doctor's supply, and so it sort of compounded onto all of that stuff. So I really started abusing the pills, and it got really bad to the point where like I had to come out to my ex and basically say like, hey, I'm addicted, I don't know what to do. I think I need to try Suboxone or something, or go to rehab, or I need to do something because I feel like I'm gonna kill myself at this point. And she kind of was a bit dismissive of it and was just kind of like, she didn't know how to react. And at that point I had damaged the relationship beyond repair anyways, and I kind of it was a weird spot to put her in. And so I ended up deciding to leave that relationship initially to get sober. But it really just kind of like kicked off this like major downward spiral where I started doing pretty much whatever came in, whatever drugs I could find. And that's also around the time that the fentanyl started hitting the streets. I didn't know when it first came out that it was fentanyl. I thought that I was buying Percocets from my dealer. And I remember at one point, like him being like, hey, these ones are like extra strong, so be careful. And I'm like, what do you mean extra strong? Like, freaking a pill is a pill. Like, there's no, I didn't get what he was talking about. But in hindsight, like these were fake pressed 30s that were just basically fentanyl pills. And so that was like really when things went downhill. I was just like out of control. I would show up to work messed up. I had, people calling in my work complaining, sending emails to my supervisor, like, dude, this guy's high at work. And I was working like a corporate job. I was literally like in a freaking suit and tie, like nodding off, or like just like, I know people have probably seen the people on fentanyl doing the zombie tilt thing. Like, it's crazy. I look back and I'm just like, I'm so embarrassed that I was like, I was that person. So I checked into rehab. Um, I did a 30-day rehab for, getting off of the fentanyl. I got out from rehab and got some time under my belt. And that's when I actually first discovered Kratom. Yay, we've gotten to the Kratom part. Actually, I'd known about Kratom before and I'd probably tried it a few times, but I remember being on the internet and I was like scrolling memes on Facebook, and there was like, I don't know if people remember those like starter pack memes, but it was like the probation starter pack or recovery starter pack. And it was like a vape, a Monster energy drink, and a bag of Kratom. And I was like, Kratom. I was like, oh yeah, because they can't test for that. And I was in a sober living house at the time. I was like, oh, well, that's perfect. They can't test for Kratom. Why don't I give it a try? And I remember the first night that I did it, like I laid in my bed at the sober house and I stayed up all night in my bed, just itching and sweating and like just being like, oh my God, this is amazing. And it was so ridiculous. Like just being high in a freaking sober house after I just got out of treatment. Like my life is literally like on the line at this point. And so that eventually, taking Kratom had me go back out to just buying pills because it scratched the itch that I just couldn't, like, it didn't satisfy what I was looking for. It was just like this placeholder for what, I really needed or felt like I needed at the time. And so that took me back out, and I got kicked out of the sober living house, showing up high on fentanyl. I moved around, staying at people's places, got into a different house, living with a friend. She kicked me out because I would show up, high on drugs. And, finally I just kind of like gave up, moved back into my parents. And they were like, you can stay here long enough to get enough money to get your own place, and then you got to be out. And I just like, at this point, like, I'm just feeling so defeated. I feel like such a loser. So I finally like get my own place. I'm kind of starting to get my life together. And that's when I met Amina, who's my significant other, my better half now. We've been together for coming up on 5 years, I guess. We met right at the start of the pandemic. Um, and we both did kratom. She actually like she showed up. We were hanging out at my house, and she was like, "Hey, this is kind of embarrassing, but like I need to take some kratom." Like, and I was like, "Oh my god, I take kratom!" And she like pulled out her little like it was a pre-workout jar, and that's what I kept my kratom in, was a pre-workout jar. I was like, "Oh my god, this is so adorable." Um, aren't we just a little match made in heaven right here? So it felt nice to have somebody that like understood what kratom was, and that we at that point we both still were kind of like in the like this is working for me for now phase, but like eventually we'll need to get off of it. um and so yeah, that's kind of what happened. I mean, we took kratom together for a couple years. It sucked at the end. We were both like fed up with it. I kind of started having panic attacks, and traveling was horrible. I remember we got stuck in Vegas with no kratom, and we were trying to find it, and like it was just horrible, horrible. We're like, what are we doing? Like this is just full on drug behavior. Like this isn't something that's serving us. Um, and so we kind of made the decision, at the start of the year. I mean, I got off in March, and she's a week behind me. We were actually we were supposed to get married on March 11th of this year, which was our 4-year anniversary, just at the courthouse with our moms. And like the week before, I was just like having panic attacks daily. I couldn't take enough kratom to calm it, and then I'd take too much and get the spins, and I literally felt like I was going crazy. Like I felt like I was in psychosis. Excuse me. And so we both decided, we were like, this isn't how we want our wedding to be. We don't want to be like, I literally could just picture myself like in the courthouse, like waiting for the judge to get through so that we could go run out to the car and take kratom. And I was like, that's a horrible thought, and I don't want that to be how our wedding is. So we decided to postpone it and get off of kratom. And so I took some time off of work. I found this community. I started coming to meetings, pretty much every single day. Joined the chat, started reaching out to people. I also got honest with my sponsor because I am in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'll have a year sober off of alcohol in October. And I've been mostly sober from alcohol for I don't know, about 7 years now, with like a couple of like slip ups, I guess I would call them. But alcohol's been out of my life, and so got honest with him, and that was a big step because I had a lot of guilt that I was lying to my sponsor about being sober, quote unquote. And as soon as I told him, he was super cool and just like, yeah, man, I get it. Fuck, I don't even know what kratom is. Like, he researched it and was like, oh yeah, that sounds like it sucks. Um, and his rule is like, if it affects you above your head, like probably isn't a good idea. So I quit everything. At this point, I'm raw dog in life, minus my nicotine, um, which is the last to fall here. But I say all that to say that kratom for me was one of the hardest things I've had to quit. And not because I mean, it's difficult to quit, but because every time I quit something before, I had kratom as a fallback, or I had weed, or I had like I always had some sort of crutch. And so this was the first time that it was just like, you've got to just sit in your feelings and deal with it. And instead of picking up a substance, you got to pick up the phone. Instead of lashing out or acting out, like, you got to reach out and you got to do these new things that are going to serve you in recovery. that I had never done before, and these things that I had never learned, even though I was, doing recovery and I was doing the steps, but I wasn't really giving my all. I wasn't being 100% honest. I always had the little thing in the back of my head that was like, you're on Kratom, you're not sober. And I would try to be like, shut up, brain, I am sober. Like, this isn't as bad, blah, blah, blah. But like when I'm dosing 8 times a day and I'm freaking Googling smoke shops off the Vegas Strip at like 4 in the morning, like that's drug behavior. That's not a life that I want to live. So it's been the most rewarding thing I've quit because of that, because now I literally go through my day and just like live my life, and I can really feel the emotions that I need to feel for the first time. And I can start to do things like this where I go back and look at my life and like, man, do I have unresolved trauma? Do I have these things that I'm still holding on to? I'm working a 4th step with my sponsor right now, these resentments that I'm still holding on to. These amends that I need to make, with people in my past that I've wronged. And so it's a healing journey, and I'm here for it. I'm excited about it. And so, yeah, I think that's my story. That's my time. I appreciate everyone being here and listening. And yeah, thank you. We'll open it up now for anybody that wants to share, or if you have a comment or whatever.